Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
If I asked you, if you're kind enough to listen regularly, if you're just turning us on for the first time, bear with me, I promise. This will be brief. If I asked you what the catchphrase of the programme is at the moment, it changes a bit. What is it at the moment, do you think? Well, if you build it, they will come. So when I'm looking for an angle on the HS2 debate, and I read this line, this is what might be called the build it, they will come approach, named after the film Field of Dreams, in which Kevin Costner builds a baseball stadium. And this is just made for us. If you build it, they will come. So the whole appeal of HS2 is not about whether or not we should be spending the money on other stuff, whether or not it's going to cut half an hour off journey times between London and Birmingham, whether this, whether that, whether or not it's going to ruin your view. It's a question of what will happen when we build it. That is pretty clear. It could transform the economies of the Midlands and the North and create faster growth in a way that 100 piecemeal projects could not, say its supporters. Okay? It's chicken and egg, as I understand it. The phone lines are open on this because you may know more about it than I do, although if your position is essentially NIMBYism, i.e. I don't really know whether it's good or bad for the country, but I know it's bad for me, so I don't like it, then I've got a horrible feeling your voice isn't going to be heard. It'll be heard here on this programme, but I don't think it should be heard anywhere else. It's utilitarianism in action. We were talking about it earlier, and presumably when the M25 was built, I'm far too young to remember, there was outcry, because it would have involved, sometimes when you're on the M25 and you see the houses that are right by the edge, or the North Circular Road. Sorry, I'm talking about London. Let me think of another example. The Bewdley Bypass. When the Bewdley Bypass was built, there was uproar in parts of Kidderminster about that. Spaghetti Junction presumably caused all sorts of outcry. I'm trying to think of something in the Northwest. I can't get past the Stockport Viaduct. Presumably when the Stockport Viaduct was built in Victorian times, there was massive, massive outcry because those blooming great brick arches were going to go right through somebody's allotment. It's a slight bit of northern stereotyping. There are plenty of allotments in the south as well. Indeed, I have one. So do you see what I mean? Heathrow, when it sort of stopped being fields and got turned into one runway, presumably some people, that plane might come down on my head. And then the second runway, oh my God, no, not more. I'm already getting woken up at 7:30 in the morning, and now the third it's progress. It's always got enemies. The country at the moment is in reverse gear. I don't think that's a controversial comment. Everybody's very happy to be going backwards in some corners of the country, to be sort of going back. Look, I don't mean that to be rude. Taking back control. So we're going back to those days when we had control. Yeah, and of course that's popular for some people. The future is always terrifying. And here we find another example perhaps of people being asked whether or not they like HS2 and really asking how they feel about progress. Ooh, no. Ooh, some people sometimes say, how are you? I say, I'm all right. I don't like change much. I don't like change. I'm growing old. I don't like change. But I travel between London and Birmingham by train quite a lot, and it's changed in recent years, and I'll tell you how. It's not about getting lucky at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon and getting a clear seat all the way to Birmingham International. It's about what you expect when you get on a British train, right? And this is where Corbyn was actually a little bit sharper than perhaps some people gave him credit for. If only he hadn't fibbed about not being able to find a seat, we may have actually picked up on the message he was making. What do you feel like when you get on a train? What do you expect when you approach rolling stock in Britain? How surprised are you when you find yourself feeling after taking your seat that you've actually arrived in the 21st century? When's the last time you travelled by train in Britain with a sense that you were travelling in the 21st century? I don't think you have done for years. I don't know what line you're on, or I don't know what route you take, but I travel a lot by train, and I haven't felt as if I was in the 21st century ever. I'm trying to think of maybe the Gatwick Express. That feels a bit state-of-the-art, doesn't it, occasionally? But that's just servicing an airport. That's not servicing commuter routes. So what is HS2? HS2 is an off-the-scale investment in the country's infrastructure. And in terms of infrastructure, whether you like this or not, it's a statistical fact. We're 27th in the world. 27th in the world for the quality of our infrastructure, despite having the 5th or 6th or 4th largest economy. I haven't checked yet this morning. We're 27th in the world for infrastructure. And if you really want to build a business base, then you need infrastructure. Even I get this. I did philosophy at university. You need infrastructure. What infrastructure have we got? Well, it's all Victorian. Railway-wise, everything's Victorian. It's incredibly old and ancient, and that's the rails, okay? You could maybe buy some fancy new carriages and trains, but you can only work with the rails that you've got. So what HS2 is about, as far as I can tell, is capacity. It's not about speed. Most people on these trains, if they've got a seat and somewhere to open their laptop, they're going to be tip-tapping away anyway. The extra half an hour they can give or take. It's about capacity. It simply means that when you get on a train, you're going to feel comfortable and ideally happy. Berlin is a good example. If you look at Berlin, where growth is a way of life at the moment, that was not the cause of the public transport system in Berlin being made absolutely state-of-the-art. It was the investment in the public transport system that made Berlin a state-of-the-art place to do business. Now, Brexit casts a new backdrop, or creates a new backdrop to this entire conversation, because whether you're for it or against it, whether you're despairing at the prospect of seeing so much of what the country has fought for and established economically in the last 20 or 30 years disappearing over a cliff, or whether you're still subscribing to the school of thought that says Boris Johnson, Liam Fox and David Davis are going to be able to deliver a brave new dawn, the likes of which the world has never seen before. It doesn't matter which side of that particular argument you're on. We know that we need to make Britain an even more attractive place to do business than it is today. It needs to be an even more attractive place to do business than it was when we were a member of the largest trading bloc in the world. That's the challenge we have set ourselves. Infrastructure has to be at the very top of that list, no? So I don't really want to talk today about whether or not they're going to tear up. That's not fair, is it? If they're going to tear up your garden, give me a call. Seriously, I'll give you some tea and sympathy. But it's not going to be enough to say we should call off the whole project. Similarly, just because the Chancellor talks about it in a very upbeat way doesn't necessarily mean that he's right. What I want to know is what the railways mean to you, particularly on this particular route. Whether or not the notion of improving or dragging, kicking and screaming into the 21st century, the infrastructure of these routes in Britain is an absolute no-brainer to you, or whether, like, I don't know, I'm overcomplicating it. Is there an argument against HS2 that isn't just NIMBYism? 0345 6060 973, or ignorance, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. So we've got a poll today, YouGov, it's all kosher, over half of Brummies think that we don't need it. How many of them travel to London every day? Surely you only poll the people who travel to London every day, don't you, on this one? It'd be a bit like asking me whether or not, I don't know, does the country need more marzipan? I hate marzipan. No, the country doesn't need. What about people who love marzipan? Someone speak for the marzipan lovers. It'd be a bit like asking me whether or not, do you feel that the elite athletes in this country get the support that they need from their local authorities? Why are you asking me that? I'm not an elite athlete. As a Brummie, do you feel that we need HS2? Well, I've never really gone any further than Selly Oak. I don't know, really. Where's London? It just doesn't necessarily follow that by finding a bunch of Brummies who don't want it, it means we shouldn't have it. Similarly, if you happen to live in the parts of London that are going to be razed to the ground by this, I understand why you don't want it. I wouldn't want it if it was going to be my house that was razed to the ground, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't have it as a nation. Camden's looking particularly vulnerable, isn't it? Parts of Primrose Hill, they're those sort of parts of London. How much weight should we put on the voice of the NIMBY? Because the other problem I have with this is that sometimes NIMBYism deserves to win. Sometimes the massed rank of voices saying it's going to cause too much disruption, to me, deserve to be heard. I want to know where you stand on this. The main argument for HS2, to be clear, is that it could provide the catalyst for growth in the Midlands and the North. That's the idea. Not that it's going to make the commute easier for Brummies who work in London, but that it's just going to make the country smaller for business who want to cover a lot of acreage. I see the attraction of that. The money is slightly worrying. I mean, 50 billion quid could obviously be spent on lots of other things. Spending it on a railway line, I'm open to persuasion, is unwise and not clever. But, again, unless you spend it, you won't know whether or not it will deliver the growth that we so clearly need. The management of projects in this country is historically awful, but that's not a reason to do nothing, is it? It's a reason to look very clearly at what could be done to improve things. And then there's the other argument that it should be built from the north moving south rather than from London moving north, so that as each bit of it opens, the benefits will accrue in the northern regions more than they will in the southeast. Finally, any overruns on HS2 should not result in raids on the rest of the transport infrastructure budget. So there's an awful lot here. There's an awful lot here that deserves slightly closer scrutiny than it's currently getting. And I'm going to roll the dice on this one and presume that you know more about it than I do. Okay? Give me a call now. Tell me where we are. 0345 60 60973. I'm going to give you an objective but an utterly emotion-free overview, which is this. It's like getting an upgrade on your computer or your Sky TV, or whatever it might be. It's about taking what you've currently got and spending a serious amount of cash on making it work better, making it work faster, and making it work at a much greater capacity. So it's like turbocharging the trains in this country. That's how it looks to me from the outside. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If they were going to tear down my house to build it, I'd see things differently. But it looks like you take an epic amount of cash and you spend it on infrastructure. You know, infrastructure, not on sandwiches and beer, but infrastructure. And infrastructure are quite literally the rails upon which countries run. In this case, they really are the rails on which the country runs. But I'm naive. I don't understand in a global market, I don't understand in the 21st century why necessarily bodies being able to move across the country is the future. Increasingly, we're supposed to be using technology to communicate with each other. The fact that we need a new runway at Heathrow and a whopping great train line running through the middle of the country suggests that that future is still a long way off. But what if it arrives when we're halfway through building HS2? Suddenly, it's halfway near to finish, £25 billion in the hole, and someone says, actually, I think the whole nature of work has changed. We're all going to be communicating via conference calls and Skype from now on. There's that element of it that I find intriguing. But the main thing I find intriguing is what you know about it and what you can tell the rest of it. Who do you trust? I could do a whole hour on that, couldn't we, one day? But when it comes to sort of £50 million, 50 million, and the rest, £50 billion of public money, or a lot of it public money, on a railway line, who do you trust to tell you whether or not it's good money or bad money? Who do you actually trust? I don't know who I would use to answer that question. So you're left with these slightly nebulous notions of progress and upgrades. What's on the other side of the coin? I don't know. We'll find out this hour. Mike's in High Wycombe. Mike, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, good morning, James. We're in Wycombe, and we're close to Amersham and Missenden and, you know, all those lovely places out there that it's going to come through. So that all gets ripped up. Wendover virtually disappears. On a personal note, Drummond Street up from Euston, that will all disappear because it's the best Indian on the planet. But
this is kind of what I meant by the things that. This is what I meant by the things that maybe shouldn't play a very big part in the national decision. A curry house closing.
But no, seriously, it's a whole street, James.
Well,
but it is that we can't get on that train. We'd have to go into London to catch it.
Yeah, that's what infrastructure does.
200 miles an hour when it goes past Wycombe or Amersham.
That's what infrastructure is, though, isn't it? It's about what's good for the nation.
It's nonsense.
Well,
it's nonsense. We've got all the grief. We've got 10 or 20 years of construction traffic and all the upheaval and compulsory purchases and all that stuff. If I want to go to Birmingham, I've got to go to London first from Wycombe. Doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, it does if you accept that most people in the country don't live in Wycombe.
No. Well, what about all the other people, the people in Amersham and Missenden and Wendover, all the way through on the line that are being inconvenienced by it?
I understand that this is the essence of NIMBYism, and I'm on your side in many ways. If I lived next door to you and I was losing my local curry house, I'm sure I'd be equally cross. But I think we're missing a central point, which is infrastructure is built for the whole of the United Kingdom, not for people in Wycombe and Missenden.
No, but the point is that we are the people.
And if it stopped to pick you up, mate, it wouldn't be HS2. It would be LS2.
Why don't we upgrade the infrastructure that's there? Why don't we, so we can still have fast trains to Birmingham, we can have normal trains to Birmingham?
But you'd still have to go to London to get on it.
No, I wouldn't. I can get on it at Wickham.
Well, they're not taking that away. HS2 is on top of what currently happens.
But this is the point. If I want to get there quick, it doesn't make it quick, does it?
No, because they're not building it for people in High Wycombe. They're building it for British infrastructure so that someone with a business in, I don't know, Kuala Lumpur looks at how many people he can get to Birmingham and back from London and decides whether or not he's going to open a business in this country. You can't ring him up and say, I'm Mike, I'm in High Wycombe. We're not going to be able to catch that train. You better build your business in Belgium instead.
James, it's of no benefit to anyone around here.
No, it's of no benefit to you.
Well, yeah, but that's why we don't want it.
But that's the definition of NIMBYism, isn't it?
No.
Yes, you just said to me it might well be good for the country, but I'm going to have a bit of an ugly view for 10 years, so we shouldn't build it.
Listen, mate, if it's coming through behind your house, you'd have
I've already said that, Mike. This is ridiculous. This is the most insane conversation I've ever had. I've already said if it was coming through my house, I'd probably be a NIMBY as well. But I'm not.
No, then. You have to weigh that stuff up.
I have, and it's NIMBYism, so jog on. Give me something meaningful. Tell me why Britain shouldn't be moving into the 21st century.
What are we saving on a London to Birmingham journey? 20 minutes.
That's not the point, is it? It's about capacity.
Get up earlier.
Oh, man alive. It's like banging my head against a wall made out of blancmange. It's not about the journey time. Most of them sitting on that train are going to be using their laptops anyway. It's about the people who can't use their laptops because the train is so full. And it's about the sense. When's the last time you caught a train in continental Europe?
In continental Europe, I don't.
Yeah.
I use a motorbike.
You see? You use a motorbike. So we're going to make Britain great again by tooling around Europe on motorbikes. If you catch...
What, mate, if everybody rode a bike in London, you wouldn't have the congestion, that's for sure.
If you ever caught a train in continental Europe, you would realise that in Britain, for the last 50 years, we have been living in the slow lane, and it's time to move into the fast lane. You, as a motorcyclist, should appreciate that.
Well, absolutely, but you see, the thing is, where's the encouragement to get people onto bikes? Where's the encouragement?
You can't ride a bike from London to Birmingham with your business in the blooming panniers.
Of course you can.
No, you can't. It's just ridiculous,
yes,
Michael. It's only, what is it, 24 minutes after 11, and you're already my worst caller of the week. I'm closing the competition now. It's the biggest load of NIMBY-ish hogwash I've ever heard in my life. And it talks to me about curry houses. Give me a meaningful reason why it's bad for the country, and do not mention Missenden.
Right. The reason it's bad for the country is we have an infrastructure.
It's rubbish!
Could be upgraded. Why can't we upgrade what's there, James? Why do we have to rip
easy answer, the bridges are too low.
No, what a nonsense.
That's just true. The bridges are too low. You go to Europe, you get double-decker trains. We can't have them on our existing infrastructure because the bridges are too low. Next question.
Is HS2 going to be double-decker trains then?
Quadruple.
You're guessing now.
It's going to be like the bus in Harry Potter.
You're making it up as you go.
All right, I'm not clear yet.
They are.
I'm not 100% clear on how many floors these trains are going to have.
No, you're not.
But to answer the question about why we can't improve our infrastructure, the answer is because most of it is Victorian. So you'd need to rip it up and start again, or you start from scratch alongside it. You can't improve what we've got. It's been taken.
Alongside it, James.
Do you know what you're like? Do you know what you are? Your idea of you're like one of those fellas who's got a trailing socket coming out of his plug, and then he's got another trailing socket coming out of the trailing socket, and another trailing. So you've got about 40 plugs running on one little thing, and a bloke comes in and he says, I think we need to rewire your whole house, mate. You've got 40 plugs running off one socket. And you say, why can't we just get 4 more trailing sockets? Why can't we just upgrade what we've already got? Eventually, Michael, there's nowhere left to go. Comedy from HS2. We both deserve a medal.
Fine electrician, I'll have you.
Yeah, well, there you go then. I'm going to find a better Sparky. I like that. That's the Tony Blair. That's the third way. But it's true. And then, look, NIMBY, respect, affection, love, sympathy. But tough. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Tim is in Surrey. Tim, what do you reckon?
Hi, well, I live in Surrey, so I'm not near the HS2, and I do believe in infrastructure, but HS2 is just far too expensive.
That seemed, you see, Michael, this is what the last caller should have done. Instead of talking about Great Missenden, it might make me worry that it's going to hit me in my pocket, and then I might listen.
Okay, so it's about £50 billion, right, cost? Some people say it'll be more, but it'll be about 50 billion, right?
I'd say almost definitely more, wouldn't you, given this country's history of public sort of projects like this?
Yeah, almost certainly, but I don't want to over-egg it.
Fair enough.
So,
don't over-egg it.
Divide by the population of the country, and you get about £1,000 a head, right? Do we really think that one train line is going to generate £1,000 of return for every person in the country, for a person in Arbroath, for a person in the Outer Hebrides. It's crazy.
No,
I mean,
because
usually when you have investment, public investment, say you want public investment in flood defences in the southwest, right?
well, how's that going to help someone in Arbroath?
Well, no, just bear with me. For that, they usually insist on an 8-to-1 return on investment. So if you have an 8-to-1 return on investment on a £50 billion project, you're talking about £400 billion return on investment. That's the kind of usual government return. That's about a quarter of our total national debt.
But that's
Really?
that's investment in quantifiable phenomenon, whereas there's a degree of speculation involved in this investment.
So you're saying HS2 is unquantifiable. So really, do we want to put 50 billion into something that's unquantifiable? I've heard estimates that actually, the idea of having it is that we'll get growth in the northeast. Great. So let's have lots of growth in the northeast. Let's have high-speed trains linking up northern towns. Great. But the problem with having an HS2 between London and the north is that it actually makes the north that much easier, so you just get people commuting in. So instead of growing the north, you could actually turn the north into more of a suburb of London and people coming in. It may have the exact reverse effect from growth, and it's incredibly expensive.
It is. Look, the one thing that no one can argue with is that it's incredibly expensive. But the next question I'm going to ask you is almost grossly unfair. All right. But bad luck.
I've come to expect that from you.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The grossly unfair question is, why do you think they're doing it?
I think it's a vanity project, and I think they've got.
That's a banned phrase. That's a banned phrase because nobody. Why?
Well, you asked me the question.
I told you it would be great. No, excuse me, Timothy. I told you it would be grossly unfair. I'm absolutely clear about that.
And it was.
Exactly. So you're not allowed to use meaningless phrases like vanity project.
I think they've got sucked into it. I think they thought it was a good idea originally when it came up. The cost was a bit low, and it's grown, and they can't kind of back down on it. What would make much more sense?
This lot could easily back down on it. They're backing down on everything. They sort of.
Well, I hope they do. And
they're not going to. The Chancellor was on this morning saying he's not going to.
Yeah, Chancellor today, gone tomorrow. Where's George Osborne? Yeah, maybe Philip Hammond.
He liked it too. Philip Hammond likes it. George Osborne likes it.
Yes, that's true. So when we have a change, maybe they'll decide they don't like it. I mean, it's got a long time to run, hasn't it, till we get it?
It has, yes. I mean, don't hold your breath. Poor old Mike, his garden's he's gonna rip out his rockery by Christmas, by the sounds of it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need if you want to contribute to this conversation. Tim was persuasive. 50 billion quid without anybody really being able to explain in clear and concise terms what our benefit will be. Lean towards one side, but when you talk about in the slightly vaguer terms, and for me the comparison with the rest of the world is crucial here. It's really important that we make Britain an attractive place to do business, and in terms of infrastructure it's currently 27th in the world. So what do we need to spend all our money on? Infrastructure, maybe. If you're wondering what we're discussing, Barry is here to bring you up to speed. Dear James, he writes, with all due respect, your case for HS2 sounds like it was created in the pub. In order to be more informed, please check the following arguments, both for and against HS2, and then start your show again. Oh, everyone loves a critic, don't they? I don't need to. I have a couple of guests who are here to provide a little bit more insight into an issue that seems to fall fairly squarely into that category we've mentioned quite a lot recently. The things about which you either care passionately or not at all. So Tim, Lancaster fits squarely into the first category. Cares passionately about this, both as a resident of North London, where the impact is likely to be higher than almost anywhere else, but also as a critic of the entire national project. Indeed, he's contributed to that House of Lords report, 970-page report into the £50 billion project. And Tim, you gave written evidence. Can I begin with an unfair question? Would you mind?
Yeah.
Why do you, what do you think was in George Osborne's head when he came up with this idea? What do you, I mean, to just give them the benefit of the doubt to start with, what do you think is the...
I think he wanted to rebalance the economy. He wanted to move economic activity to the north, but it's not going to do that. It's going to suck economic activity to the south.
Why?
because that's the experience elsewhere. If you build a high-speed rail from a capital to the outer regions, it doesn't develop the outer regions. What they need up there in the north is improved infrastructure across the north and better communication there. So the rebalancing argument doesn't work, and I don't know any economist who thinks it does. I mean, there were two other aims. One was to improve capacity, and the other was to improve journey times. Well, it does both of those, but the cost is horrendous. I mean, it's good to increase capacity and improve journey times, but if the cost is enormous, you don't do it.
I mean, in terms of priorities, I can see the argument about rebalancing the economy is the most powerful one of all, because it's almost as if the actual ramifications for travellers and workers are secondary to just this enormous bomb of money that would explode in the middle of the economy and revivify parts of it that other investment cannot reach.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's going to do that, you see. I think it may be good for London in the long term, but it's actually very bad for London in the short term. It's going to be a disaster for rail passengers coming into Euston while the work's being done.
We'll get onto that in a minute, the sort of local difficulty that I know you're well placed to comment on. Also on the line is Sir Simon Jenkins, who's former editor of the Evening Standard and, of course, the Times, and indeed a former chair of the National Trust. Which hat are you wearing today, Simon? Are you objecting on aesthetic grounds with your National Trust hat on, or on economic grounds with your journalistic hat on?
I'm not. I'm objecting as a citizen of London.
That's a third hat. So what do you dislike about it?
It's probably the craziest railway line ever invented. I mean, it makes no sense at all. As Tim said, it'll benefit London because any railway line you build benefits the stronger end of the line. The stronger end of the line here is London. Paris has benefited from all the APT investments and so on. But that's not the point in a sense. It's designed firstly to get people fast. Then they abandon that when people said they didn't know to go fast. It's now about capacity. This is not a priority for capacity. Capacity into London is on Paddington, Waterloo and Victoria. Euston is one of the, I won't say low capacity, it's very busy, but it's one of the lowest capacity lines into London. And it comes into Euston, which is one of the most useless of termini. It's only on the Victoria line. It really is a very stupid place to build a railway to. The sensible thing to do if you're going to build it is to stop it at Acton and Old Oak Common, which I still believe they may end up doing.
And then you've got much better access to the local transport infrastructure. I'll ask you what I asked Tim, and it's a slightly odd question, but I'd be grateful for your answer, which is what was behind the original decision in your opinion? What made this apparently irresistible to George Osborne?
Well, I mean,
previous
was very peculiar. It was an alternative to building an extra runway at Heathrow.
Yes.
David Cameron came up with it for that reason. And it's one of those things in transport policy. It just seemed like a good idea somewhere in the distance.
But that's the thing that confuses me, Simon, to be honest with you, because listening to expert analysis like yours and Sir Tim's, I can't quite glimpse that moment when it did seem like a good idea.
Well, the government wanted to do something for railways because it supposedly refused a third runway at Heathrow.
Right.
Cameron said, over my dead body will there be a third runway at Heathrow. I better have something different. And he came up with the railway line from Manchester to Heathrow. That was the origin of it. Then that was chipped away at, and people said there's no point in running it to Heathrow. Just run it to Old Oak Common and then come into Euston. That's what actually happened. They then looked at all kinds of alternatives for doing that. And this was one of the better alternatives if you literally wanted to go from Manchester into London. But I mean, what happens is you get this tremendous pressure from big lobbyists and consultancies and contractors and so on. They all pile in behind it. They're spending 300 or 400 million a year now on it. And no one has a vested interest in reviewing the project and seeing if it wouldn't better go somewhere else.
This is a personal question in a way. I'm hearing echoes of the Garden Bridge here. Is that it's almost as if they've thrown so much money after it now they can't admit that it's all a disaster and pull the plug immediately.
Yes, the Garden Bridge is a pea compared to a mountain.
Of course.
But I mean, it is exactly what you say. It sort of, someone put this forward as a good idea. It sounds terrific. Lots of people leap up and down and say, this is the macho things before. And nobody stops and says, look, one thing, do we in any sense need it? And secondly, is it the best place for it? And the Garden Bridge, I think, should be upstream at Battersea or something like that. It's a lovely project. but it should not be blocking the view of St Paul's just because a couple of celebrities suggested it.
A couple of celebrities suggested it, indeed. So, Tim, this question of the impact upon your part of London in particular, I presume that when the North Circular Road was built, there were plenty of people complaining that it was going to impact upon their locale unfairly. When the M25 was built, Canary Wharf even had complaints from people sort of indigenous to the area at the time. Why is this different? Why is this sort of not mere NIMBYism?
Well, what's different about this one is that the construction work is going to go on for 17 years. Phase 1 for the first 6 platforms they want to put in at Euston, and another 7 years or something for the second lot, and then we've got to redevelop Euston. So it's the length of time, it's the number of people who are going to be affected. They're going to be huge numbers of people, and there's going to be gridlock across North London. We're going to have 900 trucks a day plying through Camden. There's going to be
where does that figure come from? Where do you get?
No, it's in the HS2. It's HS2.
That's their own numbers.
Yeah.
They're not even denying that. If someone like Liam's just tweeted with, and I don't think he's being facetious, he says, look, okay, all of this is true, but think of it of having a 200-year lifespan, then all of this is a price worth paying, both materially and convenience.
Well, 17 years is a lot. If it was 3 years, we'd say okay.
Would you? But sure?
The other thing is we need a Euston that makes sense. What they're going for is a sort of bolt-on Euston, an HS2 station, and then a redeveloped Euston. Network Rail and HS2 have got to get their heads together. They're at loggerheads now. The department needs to pull them together. Chris Grayling needs to pull them together, produce an integrated design for Euston Station. And until that is done, there should be no further work at the Euston end.
Because the right arm isn't talking to the left arm.
Exactly.
It's quite bizarre, actually. So, Simon Jenkins, you've covered an awful lot of issues over the years. Can you? Obviously, the Garden Bridge comparison was a little disproportionate. Can you think of anything on this scale that you've witnessed in the past? Because it's very hard to find a proper cheerleader.
You asked him about North Circular. God knows we could do with a North Circular. There is an exact parallel in much the same line of country. It's called the Medway Box. And I remember it well. It's back in the 70s. The Medway Box was proposed to crash across London just north of Regent's Park. It was going to do devastation right across North London and South London. Bits of the East and West were built. But the general view eventually was this was just too big a project to inflict on central London. It was for all time. It made all kinds of sense. Paris has got a bit of one. People very wisely said it's just not needed. We just got to push the congestion further out. And I think exactly the same applies to HS2. You don't need it in the country. It's mostly about the outer London southeast congestion. Push the congestion onto other lines. Come into Paddington. Come into Old Oak Common. You do not need to come into Euston. I honestly think, and I have to say that I've spoken to all the people involved in this, nobody would propose it today. I
guess that's what I've been pushing you towards. That's what I find as someone who's not sort of particularly immersed in this issue. Is what I find bizarre is the simple question of genesis. But I've got a better understanding of that now. Very briefly,
James, can I just come in very briefly?
Absolutely, I'd be offended if you didn't.
It's very interesting that the majority of people in Birmingham don't want this scheme. They realise that it's not going to do much for Birmingham, and they realise that there are higher priorities for this sort of spending.
And that kind of is the point. Where does the pressure need to be applied, Simon Jenkins? And if you were in charge, what switch would you flick first?
Oh, I would just stop it. I'd switch to this thing called HS3, which is not a line, but HS3 is chronically needed rail investment in the north, particularly between Lancaster and Yorkshire, and I was up there recently. They desperately need this kind of money. London does not desperately need it. It just doesn't. I'm afraid it's very simple. Theresa May could have killed Hinkley Point and should have done so. I'm deeply depressed she didn't. She just needs to throw the switch and say, right, stop HS2 right now, spend no more money on it, let's concentrate on building in the north.
Do you think there's any chance of that happening?
The clue. Who knows?
Go on. To take a punt. Philip Hammond's been pretty outspoken today in defence of it, but Mrs. May has a bit of a carte blanche, doesn't she?
Well, she does, but the Hinkley Point decision suggests she's not got the courage. I hope she had. That's
the difference between upsetting the Chinese and upsetting the supporters of HS2, though. They're almost a category error.
Well, we have to see.
Indeed we do. We'll have to see. I'll be with you imminently, Tim. I just want to say farewell to Simon Jenkins. Will you stay with us till after the travel news?
Yeah,
I can see that you're jumping. Absolutely. 10 minutes to 12 is the time. So Tim Lancaster is still with me. He has submitted written evidence to the House of Lords Committee on the question of HS2. This doesn't happen to me very often, Tim, but I'm struggling to mount an argument against you. I mean, the massed ranks of yourself and Simon Jenkins, it seems hard to really see, as everyone's kind of acknowledged, what the politicians who originally came up with this idea were hoping to achieve. What is going to be achieved in your part of London is chilling.
Yeah, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be appalling. We're going to have 17 years of destruction around Camden and Euston, because that's the time it's going to take to get the line into Euston and rebuild and build the 11 platforms that HS2 want to put in there. And that's even before there's an integrated plan for a new Euston station. And we think it's absolutely essential that whatever happens, if HS2 does go ahead, it should be part of an integrated Euston station. So what we're saying is there has to be a complete rethink at the Euston end, and to allow time for that, Old Oak Common, which is going to be a fantastic interchange because it's going to have access to a crossrail. They should think about Old Oak Common as a temporary terminus until everything is sorted out. And I would go further and say, since HS2 tell us that 1/3 of the passengers anyway are going to get off at Old Oak Common, why do all the trains have to come into Euston? So stop 1/3 of the trains at Old Oak Common and have 2/3.
Also, Euston's a bit of an armpit. It's not the most welcoming of stations on the London.
No, it's not. I mean, it needs to be redeveloped. That's the reason it does need redevelopment. And it's if they try and build the HS2 platforms now, because they want to start very soon indeed, it's going to mean absolute chaos for commuters coming in. London Bridge is going to look like nothing compared with what's going to happen there.
And it's not the happiest of stations at the moment, but for slightly different reasons. Do you have hope? Where do you place your optimism? Because the hardest thing about this, speaking as a journalist, is identifying your enemy. It's hard to see who's actually holding the can for. The politicians have inherited it. The business people who will benefit from it will, register their support for the idea, but they're going to benefit financially when the cost of it is met by the taxpayer. So, I mean, who do you have in your sights?
Yes, you're right. Half of the cost is going to be borne by the taxpayer, and the beneficiaries are going to be largely business travellers. 60% of the travellers on this line are reckoned to be business travellers, and yet they won't be paying the full cost.
So it's improving their earning power at the cost of everybody else.
Yeah.
So who is the public enemy number one for your side of it?
Well, I wouldn't say enemy.
No, we
would just like to persuade them, and they're not listening.
Who is it? Who's the figurehead?
Well, politicians who are not listening.
And they've inherited it, so they don't feel that level of.
They've spent £1.5 billion already, so they think that they have to go on. Well, that's a very bad argument indeed, and I think that's one reason why they should stop right now. Under the law they can do this, but it's arrogant and nonsensical for them to be going on spending at this rate. And we are particularly upset that the fact they're about to start demolishing the National Temperance Hospital on Hampstead Road. They should stop that before the Euston station plan has been sorted.
Because, I mean, there's a horrible prospect of damage being done and then the project being curtailed or stopped, isn't there?
Possibly. But it'll no doubt be argued that once they've knocked down this hospital and done still further work, that it just has to go on regardless.
What piqued your interest initially? What made you get involved?
I got interested not as a Camden citizen, but as a citizen of the UK. I worked in the Treasury. I'm very interested in costs and benefits. And when I looked at this a couple of years ago, I just felt that it didn't stack up in terms of value for money, and it doesn't. I mean, the costs have been spiralling, and on the Department of Transport's own criteria, this is a low priority project, and yet they want to go on regardless.
Well, I guess you can chalk me up as a convert. My mind is boggling at all of this. So Tim Lancaster, many thanks indeed for your time today. So Simon Jenkins with us earlier. I'm going to take a couple of calls before 12 noon. Actually, why don't you stay with us for 5 minutes? Okay. And if anybody on the line says anything stupid, you can give them a slap.
Well, they can give me a slap too.
That's how. Have you done this before? You may need to pop your headphones on so that you can hear what Dorian in Bristol to start with has to say. Dorian, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello. I suppose it's because I don't think that I do think that having London to the north route is a very good idea. However, this particular everything I've heard about HS2 seems like a very bad way of doing it. It seems as if they're trying to do it not as cheaply as possible. Rather, they're trying to only borrow a little bit each year, rather than just borrow a massive amount and trying to finish it.
Why does that worry you?
Because by the time we've actually got round to finishing the route, by the time we can actually get to Birmingham and then start on the rest of the north, we'll probably should be looking at travelling around on hoverboards by then.
Yeah, well, that is the danger with technological investment, isn't it? But why do you derive... Because I've heard quite persuasive arguments this hour that we don't even need this link involving London. What we need is more horizontal, if you will, as opposed to vertical infrastructure, linking parts of the north and parts of the Midlands.
Well, I'm not really... I can't really talk knowledgeably about that. I'll be honest about that.
Fair enough.
I can't really talk knowledgeably about that. But I do think that as far as... I do think it wouldn't be a bad thing. It would be a good thing to have that route. It's just trying to finish it by only borrowing a little bit each year. Well, that's what makes the cost spiral. We really should be trying to finish it as quickly as possible.
And then the economic benefit then accrues more obviously. Yeah. I just want to run something by Tim, because this is, other capital projects, says Incorrigible FCA, that didn't stack up according to the experts. I added that last bit. The Channel Tunnel, Heathrow, Gatwick, GNR. There is this resistance always to massive infrastructure projects. In a nutshell, the reason why this one is different from all of the other ones that we objected to is no one can actually make a compelling case for what the benefits will be if it was finished tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I think, the HS1 and the Channel Tunnel, those of us who, when we travel on it, we love it. But the use of the tunnel and of HS1 is much less than was originally forecast. So actually the benefits have not been anything like as great. But we're welcome. We like it because it's there now and the money's been spent. HS2 is different because we're looking for the future. We want to get it right. There are some capacity issues, but they're not to do with, as Simon said, they're not to do with long distance travel to the north. They're to do with commuters, and that needs to be dealt with in different ways and much more cheaply. Improved signalling, better junctions, longer trains, taking out first class lines, and extending Crossrail. That can be done.
Well, yeah. Although obviously that will upset other people as well. But this notion of the impact, no way being worth
it's not worth it.
Eventual benefits is you've left me in a really difficult position on this because I haven't got anyone who's making a case for it. What are we going to do? Just sort of find a random cheerleader to start jumping up and down saying we need HS2, but I can't really tell you why.
Well, ask Philip Hammond to come back, and his reaction to your YouGov poll this morning was very disappointing.
It was, wasn't it? I saw it hitting him over the head with a bit of luck, with the fact that even people in Birmingham who are supposed to benefit from it aren't persuaded by the need for it. So Tim, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. It really has. In the next hour, we're going to be turning our attention to a suggestion that private education needs to do more to subsidise state education, not financially necessarily, more what you would call the soft skills. One senior headmaster will deliver a speech imminently in which he'll say that private schools cannot help state schools with a gun pointing at our heads. This in response to a suggestion from the new government that they might be required to do more to help state schools. I went to private school. I've never been to a state school in my life, and I couldn't hand on heart tell you what we did to help the state sector. And we were run by Benedictine monks, so if anybody was committed to the notion of Christian compassion or helping the less fortunate, it should have been my school.